Good afternoon and welcome to another lunch Food for Thought powered by Nexus IT. Today we're going to be talking about Drupal and defensive programming with Eduardo Telaya.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Food for Thought. Thank you, Rob. Powered by Nexus IT. And this topic is for today is Drupal and defensive programming. Let's avoid bugs. About myself, I've been working with Drupal for more than 5 years. I'm pretty happy to use that. I started with the Java, some frameworks like Surface, Spring, Hibernate. I'm also a teacher, contributor to Drupal, and I have participated in more than 30 hackathons around the world using Drupal and other technologies. I'm a Peruvian, so I'm a ceviche lover, so I really love ceviche. That's what I have already eaten recently. Okay, so let's begin. So today's topic is defensive programming. So defensive programming is basically a form of defensive design in order to make sure we ensure the continuing function of a piece of software under unforeseen circumstances. Basically, defensive programming practices are often used where high availability, safety, or security is needed. Also, some benefits is that we have a general quality. We basically reduce the number of software bugs and problems. And also, we make sure that the software behave in a predictable manner, and it's working okay, basically, despite unexpected inputs or user actions. So basically, we avoid the issues or future bugs thanks to the defensive programming. And it is not only on Drupal; it's also different. It should be used in all the programming languages. Okay, let's continue. Some examples that I'm going to be showing right here. Examples with correct, basically with incorrect implementations and with the correct implementations that you're going to see. Okay, so one of the classic issues, if you don't follow basically defensive programming, and a classic issue is that undefined variable. We've always found this issue on the Drupal side when you go to the admin/reports develop. You basically find this issue undefined variable. And here's the explanation. This happens because a variable hasn't been defined yet in the source codes, and it is currently being used. So you're trying to use a variable that hasn't been defined. Of course, then PHP complains. Okay, here's the example. We have a function right here, as you see, and you will see a conditional sentence, which basically it is trying to compare the variable type with events. But if you notice right here, the variable type hasn't been defined. So PHP reads all of this and says, okay, you're trying to compare this variable with this string, but where is the type variable defined? It is not basically declared. So PHP basically gives us a notice undefined variable in this function. So this is, of course, incorrect. And this is the correct way. Here is the function, and you will see here the variable type that it is declared. So we have to declare all variables that are inside a function, as you can see here. And now PHP doesn't complain anymore, and it passes basically, passes goods. Let's see another classic issue, undefined index. We have seen in different times this issue, undefined index, and this changes. It could be URL or any other index that you're trying to access on a function. So this is the explanation. this happens because an index that you want to access doesn't basically exist. Okay, but in Drupal world, it's basically because you're trying to access a Drupal field with some attributes, but never was added. You might be wondering why. Because the field was left as empty, and since it is empty, then it's not basically that the index doesn't exist. And you're trying to access to this index, even though the field is empty, and it is assumed that this is going to have a value, but you don't know if it is empty or not. Okay, let's see the example. Here, I'm trying to assign a variable URL the following nodes. Here's the attribute field underline link, a constant, and here's the index 0. And basically, we have the index right here URL, and PHP complains that okay, there is an undefined index URL. If we have basically this field link, leave it as empty, then this part of here won't exist on the array. So that's why it is complaining about that. Okay, the index URL, this one, doesn't exist and it's undefined. So that's why we get this issue. And in order to resolve it, we need to say basically, or make sure that, okay, make sure that it is not empty, all this portion of the array, as you can see. And with this, we make sure that the URL has to exist so that it passes right here, and we can get the correct value. And with this, we don't get any issues, and we get the correct value, basically. Okay, let's continue. Another classic issue as well that we usually have is when comparing strings. Basically, we use most of the times, and I have seen on the source code, double equals, which is loose comparison. Loose comparison is basically trying to guess the value. But what happens when you add a value? For example, a string as a value. For example, a string double quotes with 0. Then you may think that it's a number, but it's actually a string. So we're gonna get an issue because of that. Instead, we should use triple equals in order to compare strings, since basically this does a string comparison, and as string comparison, it verifies the data type. And so this is the basic way in order to compare strings. More details are right here, and also at the end of these slides, you will see all the documentation as well. Let's see an example. We declare a variable right here, and we have already assigned a value to 0. And we try to print, for example, type equals events, and basically this returns true. But basically, type is integer, so it is trying to compare a string, and this is, of course, incorrect. So what would be the correct way? Is basically to use a triple equals, which is a string comparison, and basically with this, we are comparing the data type. That this is basically a string rather than a number. Another issue that I basically see is that missing arguments on a function. The explanation is that this happens because a method or a function needs a parameter to be added. We forgot to include this variable sometimes. So a way to avoid this is assign a default value to the parameter. For example, I am calling this function example underline foo with a value right here. Now here I declare the function, as you can see. Okay, so key underline 1 is this parameter, and the other one it is value. But here I am not adding a value, so I forgot to add a value. Okay, and here's the rest of the logic. Then I receive a warning, missing argument 2 is basically missing in this function. It is because we are doing some operation stuff, basically doing a condition, and value uh, is basically missing because we are not passing a value right here. So instead of just, we can leave it like this, it's okay, but as long as we set by default this value, a default value basically. If we go to the next slide, this is the correct way. So we should basically declare as a default value in order to avoid this issue of the missing arguments. Let's continue. Okay. So guys, any questions, comments, or concerns? These are basically the correct and the correct ways by using the defensive programming in order to avoid software bugs and future problems. The, any questions, comments, concerns? Here is the annex with basically the concept of defensive programming, common PHP error messages, more tips about the defensive programming in PHP. Check it out because they are pretty cool. And also some PHP magic tricks, for example, the type juggling. For that's a it presents two tables with a string comparison and a list comparison. It's pretty good to check it out. And also common PHP error messages, where you're going to see a lot of messages and the correct way to resolve it by using defensive programming. So if no questions, comments, concerns, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Eduardo. This video will be archived in the YouTube channel. Oh, we have questions coming in slowly. There's a small delay.
Oh, okay, got it.
So we have a question there that says, what about, is it, when you're validating using entity wrapper, is it always convenient to use is set? Or is it enough to just use not empty? Both are fine. It really depends on what you're trying to do. Is set will check that a value is both not null and set to something, but that something can be true, false, or any value. Not empty verifies that the value is set and it's just not null. So if one of the values that you're checking for can be false, you want to check for both, because otherwise you can get a false positive. If you're checking for, like, is this empty or is this not defined, and the value is null, but a null that you defined, then you might not catch it. Also, it's good to note that some of the code that we saw today is for demonstration purposes only. We don't really call, like in that URL example, we don't really call URL like an attribute of a field like that anymore. We use, for Drupal 7, we use entity metadata wrappers, and for D8, we just use the field traverser function that will actually first we'll check if it's empty, and then we'll go into the field values. But for the sake of showing how you can call an index on an array that may not be defined, that's why that code was there.
Yep, agree. Thanks for the clarification.
All right, if there's nothing else, I'll let you guys go enjoy your lunch. Thank you again for joining, and have a good day.
Okay, thanks. See you.